Hi everyone, Titus here for part 3 of our smoke grenade series, and in this video we'll work on creating the Niagara particle system. So this will be a relatively short and simple one, just to cover the basics of the smoked effect using the texture we created from the previous video. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. Alright, so in the previous video we finished up our texture. We're going to head back to the main window and go into our SFX or VFX folder, whatever you created. And then we can just simply right click and do a new Niagara system. We're going to do new system from selected emitters. And then I like to use the fountain template and just hit the plus sign and then hit finish. I'm going to call it ns underscore smoke system. And then if you drag this into the scene and hit play, you can see the basic effect right there. So let's go ahead and double click. And let's see if we can get this effect looking a little bit more like smoke. So the first thing we can do is we can delete gravity. And then the next thing we'll do is we can go in the emitter state. For the loop behavior, I would switch it from infinite to once, duration fixed, and then I would say probably do maybe 5 seconds. This would probably be similar to the length of the penalty you want to impose. So basically, like if someone's getting smoked, how long you want the player to be smoked for. So probably somewhere around that time lane would be a good starting place. And then we can go into the spawn rate. I usually do between 100 and 120, so I'll start at 120. And we'll go into initialize particles. For the lifetime, for this one, I'm going to do between 5 and 9. That's how long the particles are basically in the scene for. And then for the sprite size, for the min and max, the texture we made, if you did it on an 800 by 800, I find that a scale between like 30 and 100 is usually pretty good. Because you generally want the smoke to be pretty large. And then for the shape location, I think sphere's okay for this one, but the size is pretty small, so I would bump that to maybe 256 or maybe 128. I'll try 256, and then you should see the effect kind of look more boxy, or I guess more spaced out, I guess is a better way to put it. And then the velocity is much too fast. We can go in here and instead of 500 and 850, do something very small like maybe 50 and 100. Because we want it generally not to like shoot up very quickly. It should be kind of slow and lethargic with a little bit of like a feeling of drag. And you can actually come to drag and increase the drag force. And then I'll also slow it down as well, so it kind of hangs in the air. Maybe that's a bit too much, so maybe 0.75. But somewhere around there. And then another thing I like to do is you can actually come into the particle update. You can hit the plus sign and search for a scale sprite size. Right, this one. And you can see the effect changes. It's quite drastic, where it starts real small and then gets real big. You can play with this and get a lot of interesting effects. I kind of like the one that it has right now, but just to show you, we can add another keyframe. So just right click, add key. And then for this value, we can maybe bump it to 1 and do maybe do 1 on the second one and then maybe 0.2. So the effect kind of goes bigger. And then maybe at the end, instead of a full effect, we can maybe bump it down to maybe 0.7. So it goes small, then big, and then it goes back to small again. And then if the transition between that effect is too jarring, you can actually click on the point and you can right click and set it to auto. And it'll give you this kind of bell curve looking thing. And you can do that with each of the points too. So it can be a nice smooth in and out transition. kind of optional. You may like the initial effect how it is, and then you can drag these curves around and just kind of see how they look and see if it gives you the effect you're looking for. And then of course the last thing you'll probably want to do is go into the sprite renderer, and instead of the default sprite, we want to look for the m_smoke effect. So we can just hit there and do a search, and that's going to be our smoke effect that we have created. Now you could override the color, but I think it's better just to do the color in the actual material effect, because you can actually right click and create a material instance and do it that way too. So you have a lot of different options, and I think it's easier to control it in the material than it is in the actual Niagara system itself. So we'll hit save, and we can hit play, and we can kind of see this interesting smoke effect that we got. And then if you think it's not dense enough, there's a few ways to address it, right? You can go to the actual shape location, and you can reduce it maybe to 200. If that doesn't work, you can bump up the count from maybe 120 to something a little bit higher. So I think I like it when it's a little bit wider. So I'll put it back 256. And then for the spawn rate, I'll switch this maybe to something higher, maybe 150. Another way you can do it too is actually under the initialized particles. You can maybe bump it, instead of 30, you can maybe do 40 or just make it a little bit bigger. There's a lot of different ways to achieve your effects, so don't be afraid to play around with the different values. Now for this particular effect, I think when we hit play, let me see if I can show it. This is pretty wide, and on the actual demo grenade toss, you can see I have a narrow channel that kind of spawns into a bigger channel. So we're gonna need to create, you could probably get away with doing it as one effect, but if you have a much different settings on the actual secondary spawn, then it sometimes makes sense to create it as a separate Niagara system. So that's what we're going to try to do here. So we'll come into our SFX folder, and you can just right click and duplicate it. And I'm going to call this ns_smoke trail system. And when we duplicated it, it's going to have a lot of the same settings. So we're only going to be making some minor adjustments. The emitter state, when we throw the grenade, I want the trail to only spawn for the life of the fuse, which is pretty short. So I think something like 1 to 3 seconds is probably better. So I'm going to lower that to 3 seconds instead. And then for the initialized particles, we had a lifetime of 5 to 9. That's much too high. Instead, I'm going to do 2 and maybe 3.5. Because the particles can technically overlap with the other ones, and that actually adds to the effect, so it's not bad. But for the shape and location, instead of a sphere, I'm going to do a cone. So kind of like that. Let's see if I can move it here. There we go. And then for the cone settings, I think 50, 30. I think a lot of the defaults are actually fine, so you probably won't have to change much with that. And I think actually a lot of this will look pretty okay. So we can probably just save that, and that way we'll have 2 different systems. The first system will spawn when we throw the grenade, and the second system will spawn when the grenade fuse timer reaches. And that'll actually create the trigger box where if the player's inside, it'll actually slow and blur the screen based on our post-process effect. Alright everyone, this pretty much concludes part 3. Like I said, it was just going to be a short one, so we just got the Niagara system created now. In the next video, we'll create the actual grenade blueprint, then we'll add some code so we can actually get the toss, where it actually spawns out our visual effects. And as always, thanks for watching, consider subscribing, and see you on the next one.